without further ado, let me introduce Houston. Houston is a member of the Otter Clan of the Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida. He's also a founding board member, I believe, of Love the Everglades movement. He's on the board of Unity Coalition, Coalición Unida, the Climate Crusader, and Reading Queer. So without further ado, Houston, I'd love for you to take it away. And people, I want to encourage you to ask questions in the chat, which some of you have already done. Please enjoy this wonderful Earth Day workshop.
Cool, thank you very much, Jenny. Again, my name is Houston Cypress, and I'm really happy to be joining y'all today. So first of all, I want to say happy Earth Day to everybody. And today is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And so I'm really honored that we have the opportunity to bring attention to some very important matters. So as we get started, first thing I want to do is I want to dedicate the work that I'm doing today in this workshop to the memory of countless generation of Otter Clan women. That's the family that I'm a part of in terms of my community, the Otter Clan. And so in that way, I also want to give respect to the many Indigenous women of our communities that have been able to do the work and make the sacrifices and continue the traditions that make it possible for me and my family to be here. And so the image that I'm sharing with you today comes from the archives of the Hansen family. And these women are actually, we believe them to be women of the Panther Clan. And we think that these women were originating from the area known as Brighton Seminole Reservation. But I just wanted to bring these women with me to the workshop so they can keep me honest today. So yeah, really honored to be here with you. And also let's remember the fact that what makes it possible for us to be here is this technology. And the technology is possible because of all the precious minerals that come from deep beneath the lands. And these lands are places where people are struggling to make a living. So we also want to remember that. But I'm really happy to be a part of this workshop, and thanks to Reading Queer. Just to be clear, I'm not on the board, but I'm a member, I'm a supporter, and I'm also a graduate of the Reading Queer Writing Academy that happened a few years ago. And so they do a number of great workshops in the community, creative writing workshops, bookmaking workshops, and other sort of literary activities. So if you ever get a chance to participate in one of their workshops or events, please do. And if you have the wherewithal, please support them. So before we get started, I just want to show y'all a little bit, like a little overview of the process that we're going to be going through today. And I'm sad that we can't get together face to face because that interaction is really awesome. But we're going to try our best to do it here online because we're really concerned about each other's public health. So thanks for showing up, and thanks for committing to do positive change in your communities. So we're going to be touching on some difficult topics today. We're going to be examining ourselves in the context of history and what our place is in the legacies that we have inherited. So please make sure to care for yourself. There's difficult things that you have to encounter today in your thoughts, difficult emotions that arise up. Remember to care for yourself today, during the webinar, and after with whatever healing modalities that you have if you're challenged by the things that this brings up. Now, we're here on Zoom, and there's a couple ways that we're going to be interacting today. There's two key functions that I want you to be aware of. The first is there's a button here on the screen so you can raise your hand, and that's how we're going to be doing the interaction today. So if you're on a laptop or a desktop computer, you look down at the bottom, and there should be a button that says participants, and somewhere around there should be a button that allows us to raise your hand. So that's how we're going to be doing the interaction. So if there's a chance for reading or for sharing anything that you've written, please press the button to raise your hand, and my colleague Eddie is going to call on you to do some reading or to do some sharing. There's also another button down here. It's called chat. And when you press the chat button, that's where we're going to also have some interaction too. So if I ask you some questions, you could just type it in the chat and it'll pop up. And I'm also going to be sharing some resources too, like links and downloads, and I'll just throw them in the chat button. So that's what we're going to do. And so I'm going to be sharing some stories. There's going to be a guided meditation for us that we're going to do together so we can plant the seeds. I'm going to be sharing some of the readings on screen so that you and I can read together. And remember, friends, bring your full selves. Please feel welcome to share what you're thinking, to share what you're feeling, because when you bring your full selves, it allows others, it encourages others to do the same, to open up. So just to test the technology, let's try something in the chat, friends. So just type in your answers in the chat and we're gonna save the answers for later. But if you're from out of state, like if you grew up from out of state, type in the chat, where did you grow up? Was it out of state? What city? Tell me where you're from. And if you grew up here in Florida, tell me where you're from, like what part of the state did you grow up in? I see Chicago, I see Venezuela, I see Milwaukee, I see Pennsylvania, there's Greece, there's Miami, there's Oregon, Colorado, Maryland, Texas, Parkland, Florida, Connecticut, and friends from Oklahoma. We have people that originate from Cuba, Cleveland, Illinois, Canada. This is awesome, friends. Welcome. I'm proud to be transmitting from South Florida in the watershed known as the Greater Everglades. So thank you everybody for joining us today. So that's how we're going to be doing that. And just to test it a little bit more in terms of like raising the hand button, remember if you can find the raise the hand button, I would like Eddie, my colleague in the panel, to choose 2 people. So if you want to share, raise your hand and give me an answer to this question. Like, why is this workshop important to you? Like, why are you attending today? So if you've given it some thought, please press the button to raise your hand and Eddie is going to randomly select 2 people to share very briefly, why are you here today? Why is this workshop important to you? So we're testing the button that's raise your hand, and go ahead and press the button and let's see who's here. So we're looking for 2 people, Eddie, to share really briefly, why is this workshop important to you? Why are you attending today?
Okay, I'm going to bring in Gabriella.
Welcome, Gabriella.
Hello, welcome.
So please let me know, why is this workshop important to you? Why are you attending today?
Hi. This workshop is very important to me because I didn't grow up here in Miami or in the United States, but we share a lot of things in our culture with modernization, industrialization, and after colonization. You know, we share a lot of the same fears, and I think it's important for me because I never got used to the culture here, and I always struggle to be part of the city. And I developed depression over the years working in advertisement, and also I couldn't really fit into the art community because many reasons. I also was an immigrant, so for me, like college and all that was not like in the picture. But I started gardening and farming and urban farming and getting into my community because I was missing my family. And all that time that you go around, you don't know what's going on with you. But the main thing is that I always miss my family and learning from my elders, even though they too do a lot of modern things. But I think it's something within my soul and heart. And gardening and being outside helped me a lot, and I owe a lot to nature. And the more that I go and the more that I spend time out there, my worries is for my community to have time to heal and time to like think first before we act, because I think like we're all in a state right now that we want to do, at least I feel anxious, even though I do my herbs and I have a support system, I have a safe roof on my head, but I do work with a lot of people that are out there feeding the people on the street, that they're taking care of our community. And I just want to know what organizations, what people we can support that have been fighting for this for a long time. And I want to meet elders. I want to be more in contact, not because they have a good platform, but because they're there living. Like, I'm concerned that when I go to UF Extension office, the person doing the, sorry, one more thing, doing the soil investigation, they never spend time outside. So I just want people to, you know, consider that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gabriela. And I'm hearing that this is about making deeper connections to place, to healing, to remembering our ancestry, and about intentionality. So thank you. And Eddie, let's have one more person to share really briefly before we continue. And again, the question is, why is this workshop important to you? Why are you attending today?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Welcome.
Hi.
Yes, what's your name? Coco?
My name is Coco. Yes. Thank you for hosting today. I'm calling in from Lenapehoking in Canarsie Land in Brooklyn, New York. I'm from the Wichita Territory in Dallas, Texas, born and raised. And I'm first generation Chicana. My family's from Mexica Territory in south of Mexico in Guerrero. And for me, as a diasporic person who is very light-skinned and white presenting, I think it's important for me to request land acknowledgements in all of the spaces that I call, you know, home, whether it's a work home or a spiritual home. And so for me, it's important to understand the history of the land where my body is, mostly because Lenape land is, unceded, occupied territory. So I find it really important for me to request the people that I'm sharing this work with acknowledge that genocide is continuous, is directly related to the land. It's continuous, it's ongoing, it's happening now. And so I think in a land acknowledgement, that's a space of accountability, because I'm privileged to understand this knowledge and to understand genocide through firsthand education from Indigenous, Black, queer, and trans and two-spirit folks that have gifted that knowledge to me. And so for me as a white passing person, somebody who was born in the US and English was my first language, for me it's important to understand how to craft a land acknowledgement wherever I'm occupying space. And it's a muscle that I'm really trying to actively nurture in my life and in my practice. So I'm really grateful to be here in your presence and a part of this crew today. So thank you.
Thank you, Coco. And again, I hear that it's some of our reasons. It's also about connecting with the history and also the legacies of these historical events that are still present today. So thank you, Coco, for reminding us. So as we begin, I just wanted to share some ideas and some key questions that we can take away. But even as we go through the workshop, and even as you develop this land acknowledgement for yourself today and tomorrow and work on it, remember that question. Why is this important to you? Why are you attending today? Like, why are you doing this? Because your answer to that question can also be included in your statement. That's going to be helpful in developing your land acknowledgement. So the reason that we're doing this is that so we can disrupt the power dynamic. Like, how can we disrupt the colonial matrix of power? That's an important question. And it's also important to ask, why is it important to express our relationships with the natural world? So about disrupting the power dynamic, it's about the power of our words. We have Poets that are the unacknowledged legislators of the world by Percy Shelley. And we have Bob Marley, who reminds us that we can chant down Babylon. And some of the indigenous healing songs that we use today are actually based on our indigenous creation stories. So that's a little bit about the power of the language. But remember, friends and family, that what we're doing today is only a beginning, so don't stress out. But let's try our best to craft a public ceremony known as the land acknowledgement. For some of us, this could probably be just the beginning of our familiarity with our indigenous neighbors and friends. And for others, it's going to be a continuing, a deepening of the relationship. And so It's about getting to know our Indigenous hosts. What are their priorities? And let's make some marks, some milestones on the pathways to new friendships, and let these land acknowledgements be opportunities for strengthening relationships. So, like Coco was saying, there is a lot of history to uncover, to remember, and to honor. And that's really an important aspect of the decoloniality, as the work of decoloniality, honoring the values of other systems. So the kind of histories I'm talking about, like Coco and others were mentioning, is the difficult and painful realities experienced by Indigenous people. And some of these painful realities have also been experienced by our friends in the African communities, their descendants that were brought here against their will to Turtle Island. And so what I'm talking about are the realities of genocide, displacement and dispossession, war, discrimination, apathy, and ignorance. Now, these kind of atrocities, they can create traumas. And the traumas, they can cause pain for many generations down the line. Intergenerational trauma, historical trauma. So it seems that reconciliation and the kinds of practices and policies that come from that can be important steps in healing the divide that the traumas perpetuate. So that's some of the implications of the work that we're doing today. But you know, like in my life, I once met an Ivy League educated media professional, and he's a gay man. And this well-trained professional once told me, I didn't think it was possible for somebody like you to even exist, Houston. And I guess that's because he was kind of shocked that I identified as gay, identified as two-spirit, and a Miccosukee man. Some people would say a Miccosukee diva. But I think that sheds light on how successful the American project was and still is at erasure. And so a few years ago, I went through psychotherapy and counseling and other techniques. But what really helped me to heal from my own personal traumas was the fact that how we talk about our stories matter. So I think that's some of the work that's involved today is about reframing the situation, looking at things from a new perspective. Now, really briefly, current events can shed light on some of the situation today. These current events are opportunities for support, for collaboration and coalition building, showing up for each other when it's appropriate and when we have the capacity to do so. The landmass known as the Americas is also known as Abya Yala in some Indigenous communities. And in places like throughout Central and South America, in places like Colombia, there have been assassinations of Indigenous community leaders, people that are struggling to protect their lands and waters from extractive industries. We know how first world policies are impacting so-called third world communities around the world. If we look at 2012, there was the Idle No More movement that rose to address Canadian legislation and ongoing colonization. Around 2016, there was the Standing Rock phenomenon and the saying no to the Dakota Access Pipeline. Now remember, out of Standing Rock, they actually wrote a curriculum. So I'll drop the link in here for that. It's a really good learning source. In the past few years in Canada, the Unistoten Camp and the Wet'suwet'en Nation, learning about that struggle shows us that there's different kinds of leadership in Indigenous communities, the elected leadership and the traditional hereditary leadership. So it's good to have a more sophisticated understanding of that. But even here in Florida, there's been a lot of anti-pipeline and decolonization work organized by people like Miss Betty Osceola from the Miccosukee tribe of the Panther Clan, and inspired by some of the elders that have passed on, people like Bobby C. Osceola, who has passed on. But this reminds us that so much of the knowledge is held by the elders. But right now, communities like the Mashpee Wampanoag, these are the very people that welcomed the Pilgrims when they arrived, are actually having their lands and their reservation lands taken away from them by the federal government. And right now, the Navajo Nation, the Diné Nation, is struggling to survive in light of their battle with the coronavirus. And the federal administration actually wanted to give Indigenous communities $0 when it came to fighting coronavirus. So these are some of the ongoing effects of colonization and discrimination that we're dealing with today. But you know what? I would like to look at this opportunity as an opening for our societies to look at ourselves in new ways. So let's walk towards these visions together, all right? So now it's time for a guided meditation. It's going to be very brief, but I invite you to find a comfortable position and to perhaps close your eyes. Trust your imagination, friends. Embrace your intuition. Whatever images or feelings pop up, just accept it. Don't censor it. Let it play in your mind. So get comfortable. Close your eyes. And you can place your hands over your heart as you do this part. And we're going to ask for a seed of our highest good to come forth from our hearts. We're going to take that seed and keep it somewhere safe, maybe in our hands or in our pockets, as we go to a sacred place. It's going to be a short walk, but we're going to go through some dark woods. And time moves differently here. In this place, as we walk through the woods together, we notice that the day moves faster. And as we get deeper into the woods, perhaps we cross a stream. And going beyond the stream, where we see there's a clearing ahead, an opening in the forest floor where we can sit and be comfortable. So now we find that the day has become night and it's time to light a fire. And it's a sacred fire, it's a cleansing fire, a liberating fire. This is a safe place for us to remove the masks that we wear, the masks of our assumptions and our expectations, the masks of our many attitudes, the masks that maybe get in our way sometimes. We can take these masks off and throw them into the fire so that we can reveal our authentic selves. So go ahead and please take your masks off, the many masks that you wear during the day, the night, all the people that you become in your dreams, and what's left of us when we're not even dreaming in that deep, dark place. So we're going to throw all these masks into the fire. And we're seeing above us in the night sky, the Milky Way is swaying. So it's a good place to call forth our authentic selves. And as the sunrise approaches, the fire begins to die down. And we realize that this may be a good place to plant our seed. Because in Miccosukee gardens, we typically burn the field before we plant the corn seeds. So it's a good place to plant our seed here. We're going to plant it below the area where the fire was burning. And it's okay, it's not hot or anything. It's a magical place here. And we're going to request that whatever grows from the seed of our highest intentions, let it inspire our dreams. And let those dreams inspire our actions. So having planted the seed there of our highest good and asking for inspiration, I think it's time to walk back through the forest now. We're crossing the stream that we crossed, going through this deep, dark forest, and we find ourselves approaching a beautiful day again. And so we can come back to the place where we are right now. Maybe we're seated, maybe we're laying down. And we realize even though we've spent a day in this magical sacred place, we're right back here on Wednesday, April 22nd, Earth Day, in a Land Acknowledgement seminar workshop. Thank you, friends. Welcome back. So I want to talk very briefly about the Land Acknowledgement as a public ceremony. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer, maybe one person, to raise your hand, use the button. And I'm going to ask Eddie to choose a person to answer the question like, do you know of any land acknowledgement that you may have seen or witnessed that you're familiar with? Like, what was the gist of that? And I want to hear from one person very briefly.
Okay, Ashley, you're live.
Thank you so much for hosting this awesome event. The land acknowledgements I can think of that I've seen are typically in social media at like the bottom of a post where somebody acknowledges the land where the picture was taken. I've personally not seen a land acknowledgement at an actual event.
That's awesome, Ashley. Thank you very much about using these land acknowledgements in unique places. And that's one of the examples that I wanted to show. So thanks for bringing that up. We don't always have to use them at events. We can use them in artworks. We can use them in books. So that's great. Thanks for reminding us of that. Now, why is the trend becoming popular these days? Well, it's because of the progress of communities advocating for justice in many forms, like social justice, environmental justice, gender equality, gender diversity. And if you're a part of that, doing that work, thank you very much, because we need to have more of this. But more specifically, this public ceremony, land acknowledgement, arises in the context of truth and reconciliation. And that because of nation states that have already had those processes, like Canada, like Aotearoa, which is New Zealand, South Africa and Germany, and many other places around the world. These organizations and nation states apologize for the injustices that they have committed or been a part of. And this creates a space for healing. We reconcile divided communities, but we also reconcile communities with their own troubled past. But we got to remember, as the host of the podcast Media Indigena, Rick Harper, says, don't let the land acknowledgements become reconciliation without a reckoning, all right? So I want to do a quick survey before we start reading some of the text that I have to share. So just as a show of hands, or not really a show of hands, I just wanted to see in the chat, yes or no. Did you know that the United States actually already apologized to the native peoples of the United States? Yes or no in the chat, please. Great, so I'm seeing a lot of people that did not know about it. Some people only knew vaguely, but there's a lot of people that did not know about the apology. So I'm really happy that we can share this information with you, because this is the American context for reconciliation. So it's time to do a little bit of reading. We're going to read the actual apology together, and then we're going to go into some examples of a poetic response by Layli Long Soldier, and then it's time for us to make a draft of our own land acknowledgements, and then we'll share it with the group, all right? So I just want some volunteer readers. So if you want to read some of the text, raise your hand right now. We'll read a couple paragraphs at a time and then pass it along to the next reader. So I'm going to ask Eddie to call out about 5 names right now. And if you hear your name, just get ready to read in that order, and I'm going to make note of it too. So Eddie and volunteers, please raise your hand if you want to be a reader, and we're going to choose 5 people right now.
We're going to start with Nicole Perry, then Cody Hirsch, Jane Westberg, Nutka Marquez, and Christina Roach.
Great. Okay, cool. So you can give me back the host so I can screen share.
You should be able to do so.
All right. So friends and family, I'm going to be sharing my screen now. And what you're going to see on screen is a copy of the bill, which was published in around 2009 as the apology to Native peoples. So I'm going to start us off by reading the first paragraph, and then we're going to actually jump into the part that says joint resolution, all right? So this is intended to acknowledge a long history of official depredations and ill-conceived policies by the federal government regarding Indian tribes, and offer an apology to all the Native peoples on behalf of the United States. So calling on Nicole Perry, please start reading for us where it says to acknowledge, and then you can wrap up the beginning of page 2. So welcome to Nicole Perry.
Thank you so much for doing this. To acknowledge a long history of official depredations and ill-conceived policies by the federal government regarding Indian tribes and to offer an apology to all Native peoples on behalf of the United States. Whereas the ancestors of today's Native peoples inhabited the land of the present-day United States since time immemorial and for thousands of years before arrival of the people of European descent, whereas for millennia, Native peoples have honored, protected, and stewarded this land we cherish. Whereas Native peoples are spiritual people with a deep and abiding belief in the Creator, and for millennia, Native peoples have maintained a powerful spiritual connection to this land as evidenced by their customs and legends.
Thank you. And now we're going to call on Cody Hirsch. And my friend Cody, welcome. So please read 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas from the arrival to the utmost good faith.
Whereas the arrival of Europeans in North America opened a new chapter in the history of Native peoples. Whereas while establishment of permanent European settlements in North America did stir conflict with nearby Indian tribes, peaceful and mutually beneficial interactions also took place. Whereas the foundational English settlements in Jamestown, Virginia, and Plymouth, Massachusetts, owed their survival in large measure to the compassion and aid of Native peoples in the vicinities of the settlements. Whereas in the infancy of the United States, the founders of the Republic expressed their desire for a just relationship with the Indian tribes, as evidenced by the Northwest Ordinance enacted by Congress in 1787, which begins with the phrase, "The utmost good faith shall always be observed toward the Indians."
Thank you. And so I'm going to drop the link to this text in the chat so we can read the full thing later, but I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead a couple sections and ask our friend Jane Westberg to read, let's see. Let's go here. The resolution of apology. And so on page 5, I'm going to ask Jane Westberg to read, starting here, maybe like 3 stanzas. Recognizes.
Recognizes the special legal and political relationship Indian tribes have with the United States and the solemn covenant with the land we share. 2, commends and honors Native people for the thousands of years that they have stewarded and protected this land. 3, recognizes that there have been years of official depredations, ill-conceived policies, and the breaking of covenants by the federal government regarding Indian tribes.
Thank you, that's good. And I'm going to ask for my friend Nirka to read 4 and 5.
I think Nutka lowered her hand, so I'm not seeing her here anymore. So can we skip to Christina Houston?
Welcome, Christina. I welcome you to read paragraph 4 and 5, please.
4, apologizes on behalf of the people of the United States to all Native peoples for the many instances of violence, maltreatment, and neglect inflicted on Native peoples by citizens of the United States. 5, expresses its regret for the ramifications of former wrongs and its commitment to build on the positive relationships of the past and present, to move toward a brighter future where all the people of this land live reconciled as brothers and sisters and harmoniously steward and protect this land together.
Thank you. And then I'm gonna...
We do have Nirka is back on, so.
Okay, Nirka. I welcome you to read number 6 and 7. I'll scoot the page down so you can see it, but number 6 and 7, please.
6. Urges the President to acknowledge the wrongs of the United States against Indian tribes in the history of the United States in order to bring healing to this land. And 7, commends the state governments that have begun reconciliation efforts with recognized Indian tribes located in their boundaries and encourages all state governments similarly to work toward reconciling relationships with Indian tribes within their boundaries.
And I'm just going to mention that there's a disclaimer here. And nothing in this resolution authorizes any claims against the United States or serves as a settlement of any claims against the United States. So I'm going to drop the link here. When we have a chance to write, all the links are going to pop up in the chat. But this is the American Context for Reconciliation, an apology that was hidden in legislation that nobody knows about, that was read to only 5 Indigenous leaders, and it took a poet to bring it to our attention. And the poet that I'm talking about is Layli Long Soldier. So she took the time to really read the format of the apology and did a poetic response to it. So I'm going to show on screen some of the text that we have here as we do our writing so you can see what it looks like. So now is a good time to really think about why we're doing this and to create a draft of some of the statements. So it's not a final thing that we're working on. And I want you to send copies of your statement later, and I'll work with you after the workshop if you have any questions. But let's take a few minutes now in writing our own version of a land acknowledgement workshop. Like, what are the elements of a workshop? I mean, elements of a good land acknowledgement. So just to let you know, Eddie, I'm going to share the screen again. And I'm going to be pulling up a document that's available at the US Department of Arts and Culture. It's not an actual department, but it's more like a nonprofit. And they have a really good guide for how to write a land acknowledgement too. So you can refer to this later. But the first thing is step 1, to identify the traditional inhabitants of the lands that you're on. So if you're from out of state of Florida, or if you're from around the world, and if you're visiting places throughout Turtle Island, throughout Oglala, I'm going to drop in some links that you can use to find out who are the indigenous communities in your area. But it's a great time to visit, to make friends. The guide also recommends that we might take a step 2 to articulate why we're doing this. You can write a simple statement like, we acknowledge that we're on the traditional land of these people. Or you can go deeper, paying my respects to elders both past and present. Or even deeper, like Coco was doing it by saying that there's unceded territory of people that has been occupied or seized. But really, like, it's an answer to the question, why are you doing this work? For me, it's a matter of addressing the erasure. So I'm going to drop a link to my website so you can see my version of a land acknowledgement that I use for my nonprofit. And again, delivery of the statement. Imbue the statement with meaning. Take your time. Don't rush through it. And let this be helpful to the communities that are our neighbors. So that requires getting to know them and talking with them and asking them, what are their priorities? How can I be of service? How can I be in solidarity with your community? How can I be a good friend? How can I be a good neighbor? So keep that in mind. And now is a good time to write. So I'm going to go ahead and play some music for you. And then we're going to choose some people to give us some shares of their draft, what they're working on. So I'm going to go ahead and cut to some music. And I'm also going to be dropping links in the chat so you can see that and use that later. And I'm playing some music for you while we do that. But go ahead and take a couple minutes now to write. I'll check back with you in about 3 or 4 minutes just to get some volunteers to share a draft of their land acknowledgement statement, what we're doing to disrupt the power dynamic, what we're doing to advance justice. So thank you. I'll check back with you in just a few minutes, and I'm going to play some music for you and drop some links.
I have arrived. I am hearing. I am listening. I am understanding. I have arrived. I care for you. I carry you. I love you. I have arrived. Our Mother Earth. I am grateful. 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 I am grateful.
All right, friends. Thank you. Welcome back, friends. I just wanted to give you a few minutes of time at home or wherever you are to begin to write a land acknowledgement. And so we wanted to identify the traditional inhabitants or people who live here in your area, maybe. So I dropped some links that you can use to find out a good map, an interactive map that shows you who lives here or in the area that you are, and some additional links there. So I'd like to hear from, let's choose 2 people for now. And if we have some time, we'll choose a couple more. But let's hear from 2 people to share the draft that they're working on, some language that they put together, or maybe like creative ways of a land acknowledgement. But let's hear some examples. Eddie, who are our first 2 sharers?
We have Ashley again, would like to share.
Welcome, Ashley.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you share with us some of the language that you're drafting or some of the ideas that you're putting into your statement or land acknowledgement?
Yes, and just to clarify, I am a non-Indigenous person and a descendant of settlers. So I'm in the land also known as Tallahassee, Florida, so this is kind of catered to this area. So this is my first pass. I acknowledge that this land, also known as Tallahassee, Florida, is located on the unceded homelands of various nations, including the Appalachian Indian Nation, the Miccosukee Nation of Florida, the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, and the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida. All of these tribal nations still exist today, and I encourage all to learn about and support these nations.
Very well done, Ashley. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that because it took some time to identify Indigenous communities of the past and the present. And it encourages further research or encourages people to get to learn more. So Thanks, Ashley. I appreciate you. Let's go ahead and hear from a second person to share. Eddie, who's up next?
We have one other raised hand here. And I believe we heard from Coco earlier, but she's raised her hand again, so.
Welcome back, Coco. What do you have?
Hello. Hold on. Okay. So I have been working on a land acknowledgement since Seder. I was asked to offer one for a Seder in my home. So I started out by saying, hi, I'm introducing myself also as an accountability measure for this information. So I say, hi, I'm Coco, I'm first generation, and I talk about who my mother is and where my family's from. And then I say, I'm grateful to share this space with you on traditional territory of the Canarsie people, which spans from Long Island to Jamaica, Queens. I want to take a moment to recognize that each of us are guests here in Lenapehoking, New York City, and that our existence is not only an act of gentrification of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, but also an ongoing daily occupation of unceded Indigenous land as part of the act of genocide against First Nations across Turtle Island. The island of Mannahatta and Greater Lenapehoking has been a home to numerous Native nations who have lived, traveled, traded, and raised their families here. And Lenapehoking continues to be home of the largest urban Indigenous population on Turtle Island or North America. For me, as a guest of this place, I strive to live in good relation to this acknowledgement meeting. I take it as an honor to share this knowledge with you as it's been shared with me. And as my friends, I'm grateful for you to also share this knowledge now that you know. So I'm asking for, it's a call to action for me that the folks that I share this with then are, that they're accountable now, basically.
Excellent, Coco. Thank you very much. And what I appreciated about that is it reminds us that these are ongoing processes and that even processes like gentrification can be implicated in this type of colonization work. And I also appreciate that what your statement does is it counteracts the miseducation that is so prevalent in the United States educational systems. And it also highlights the need to respect other knowledge systems, not just Western knowledge. So it's a decolonization of epistemology. And so that's really awesome. So thank you, Coco. Now, time flies when we're having a good time. So we're approaching the end of our time together, but I wanted to just briefly touch on what the limitations and the critiques of a land acknowledgement are. Because again, these are only beginnings. Don't let this be something that is a statement and you're done. Let it be an opportunity to strengthen relationships, to strengthen friendships. How can I be of service to Indigenous communities? And it seems that when we support Indigenous rights, especially as it concerns the environments, it's everybody's rights. Because I know here in Florida, if people ask me about land acknowledgements, I encourage them to support the environmental priorities of the Miccosukee tribe, the Seminole tribe, and the independent communities here. Because for my community, we're very private and we don't want to share too much of our culture or our language, but you can definitely support our environmental and conservation priorities. So that's what I encourage people to do here locally. But you know what? Let this be an opportunity for action as well. There is the matter of land. Like, oh, no matter what pretty words we use, no matter how meaningful or strong our relationships are, what about the matter of land? And so sometimes people think about decolonization work as a shocking sort of thing to consider when it comes to land. But it doesn't have to be that controversial. Witness the situation of the Mashpee Wampanoags, who tried so hard to become federally recognized for so many years, and they finally did it, and they got land. And now that land is being threatened. There's a process that is known as the lands into trust process. And that's actually how reservation lands are created. Let's say there's a public land, it goes through that process and it eventually becomes held in trust by the federal government. So that's a process that we can all educate ourselves on and support. So if you ever wanted to do work that's supportive of Indigenous communities, learn about that process and advocate for that process in your home communities so that Indigenous communities can grow their land base through a process that is publicly recognized and accepted. But again, I've dropped some links in the chat here. Time has flown, but we've had a good hour to begin this work. And I want you to know that you can please feel free to reach out to me, and we'll continue to do this work together in conversation. So I'm dropping my email in the chat, but just so you know, it's lovetheeverglades@gmail.com. And so please, but again, this is only the beginning of work that is going to be about deepening our friendships, deepening our relationships, being supportive of our friends, our neighbors, our Indigenous hosts. And so thank you very much for joining me today. I look forward to hearing from you later, whether it's an email, whether it's in face-to-face. And I just wanted to check in with our host from the organization MDC Live Arts. We have a number of people asking, is the video going to be archived and will it be shared?
Yes, the video will be available on MDC Live Arts' YouTube page this afternoon. And you can also see it on facebook.com/MDC Live Arts.
So as we wrap up, I just want to say that we can have land acknowledgements in all sorts of places. It doesn't have to be a public ceremony. There's this really amazing poetry book that I have read. It's called Resisting Canada. And in the very beginning, the introduction, it starts out with a land acknowledgement. But I like this land acknowledgement because it doesn't only recognize the people who live here, but it celebrates acts of resistance. So that could be something that, that you want to do. Highlight Indigenous leaders that you've been inspired by, highlight Indigenous artists, highlight their environmental priorities, their cultural priorities, or maybe bring attention to nonprofits that are operated and administered by Indigenous people themselves. That's another way of being in support and in solidarity with our friends. But again, I wanted to say to our everybody here, all the friends and family, happy Earth Day. This is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and I'm really happy to be sharing it with people like you, are my friends at MDC Live Arts, Reading Queer, and all the fabulous people that have joined us from around Turtle Island and around the world today. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to check the chat box for the links, and I'll be sharing them in my social media as well. But thank you very much, and happy Earth Day, everybody. Let's work together to create opportunities for a better world one day at a time. And let's use this as an opportunity to strengthen our friendships with one another. I love you, and I wish you all the best. And I look forward to seeing you somewhere deep in the greater Everglades.
And I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of MDC Live Arts to thank everybody for being here, to thank Houston for a beautiful, beautiful experience this afternoon. Thank you all so much.